Hello everybody, welcome and thank you for joining us for this latest training webinar on the new features of IBIS TRAX version 3.1 Service Pack 1, or version 3.1.1 for short. So to begin with, can I just make sure that everyone can see the slide on screen and also hear my voice? You can let me know using the chat box. Okay, so my name is Brian Leahy and I'm an instructor with Ultra Electronics Forensic Technology. I've been with the company since 2006 and I'm based in the European office in Dublin, Ireland, but a lot of my time is spent at international client sites providing user training on IBIS. Today I'm speaking to you from Ireland. The marketing manager, Sabrina Benzid, is hosting the webinar from Montreal, and we are joined by over 120 attendees from around the world, so you're all very welcome. Okay, so what we're going to cover today are the new features of the latest version of your IBIS TRAX software, which is version 3.1 Service Pack 1 or version 3.1.1, like I spoke about previously. Firstly, we're going to look at the features that are common to all machines, such as image display improvements and case and exhibit changes. Then we'll focus on the three IBIS systems separately, starting with the brass tracks, where there are a couple of changes to things like the navigation compass and the validation screen. I'll also give a quick update on a couple of issues related to cartridge cases from Glock pistols. Next, it'll be on to BULLETTRAX, where things have speeded up considerably. Version 3.1.1 is the first version that offers support for unrifled bullets, so we'll look at that, as well as how to handle the new Glock Marksman rifling. Finally, we'll take a look at match point, where there are some new indicators on correlation requests. We'll go through the correlation of unrifled bullets, and we'll finish up by seeing some display improvements on match point. So that's what's on the menu for today. As always though, we'll start with a poll question. So the question is your IBIS system currently running version 3.1.1? So your three options here are going to be yes, no, or don't know. I'll mute my microphone for 30 seconds or so to allow you to answer. Okay, so thank you for your responses there. It seems like 53% of you are running version 3.1.1, while 43% of you are not sure or don't know. That's fine. If you are in the don't know camp, how to find out what version you're currently running is really easy. All you need to do is log into any of your IBIS workstations and click on the help menu at the top. From here, you click on the About option and a pop-up window will open, at the bottom of which it will tell you what version you're currently running. So here in this example, it's version 3.1.1. Our deployment team in Montreal are in the process of upgrading all of our client sites around the world, and I believe that currently it's at 75% are now running version 3.1.1. So if you don't have it yet, you soon will. All right, so let's start then with the new features that are common to all the IBIS machines. They're not specific to any one system. You're going to see them across all IBIS systems. Okay, so first up, the quality of displayed 2D images has been improved. On version 3.1.1, images appear a little sharper than they did in previous software versions. On the left here, we see a breech face image as it appears in previous software versions, and on the right is the same breech face image viewed in 3.1.1. Now, this is strictly a visualization feature. Saved images and correlation results are not affected. The same is true for bullets. Again, on the left, we see a land impression displayed on a software version prior to version 3.1.1, and on the right, it's the same image displayed on version 3.1.1. It's a little bit more difficult to see the improved sharpness here, so we've zoomed in on a section of the land impression. Again here, saved images and correlation results are not impacted. It's just a sharper image for the user to see. On the 3D side of things for cartridge cases, the acquisition process has been improved with the result that we retain more of the fine topographical details while maintaining correlation performance. You can see here on these images of a Glock cartridge case, there's a little more detail on the shear mark retained on the version 3.1.1 image on the right-hand side. Another common feature can be found in the Add Case dialog box for BULLETTRAX and BULLETTRAX, where it is now possible to provide information for a contact person at an originating agency. A particular individual's contact details can be recorded, making it easier to provide timely feedback on hits or leads. Any contacts created are saved on the machine for that originating agency and are available on a drop-down so that typos can be avoided. It's a free-form text field, so names, phone numbers, and email addresses can be entered. Where a long list of contacts has been built up, there is a search feature. And also the contact field can be set to mandatory under preferences, which means that you would be forced to enter a contact name for an originating agency. On firearms, it's now possible to make the entry of a firearm exhibit mandatory under certain circumstances. So if an exhibit has a category of test fire terminated or test fire returned, the firearm exhibit field can be set to mandatory, meaning that it's not possible to create a test fired bullet or cartridge case exhibit without entering a firearm exhibit that's associated to it. So you can see here the red asterisk next to the firearm exhibit number, basically telling us that it's mandatory and not allowing us to continue by clicking OK. It can be bypassed by selecting none. If you look at the drop down here, you'll see there is a none option in the event that there was no firearm associated or the details weren't available. And also now within the firearm exhibit, the serial number for a firearm can also be set to mandatory. So again, here you see the red asterisk next to the serial number field in a firearm exhibit dialog box. This means that it won't be possible just to leave a firearm serial number blank, because when that happens, there's sometimes confusion if the serial number has been omitted in error or if the serial number was erased from the firearm, which are two very different things. It's worth noting that these new mandatory constraints are not enabled by default, and they need to be set under your user preferences, which are available under the Tools menu. Okay, time for another quick poll just to see what the spread of users here is before we go into the new features of the individual IBIS systems. So please answer the question on screen about what systems you regularly use, and I'll mute my microphone for 30 seconds again to give you a chance to answer. Okay, so it looks like we've got a majority of BULLETTRAX users here today. While almost a third of you regularly use all the systems and 15% of you are match point only, or mostly match point, sorry. We'll be going through the individual systems in the order BULLETTRAX, BULLETTRAX, match point, but each section is just 5 or 6 screens long. So even if you're not a user of a particular system, you won't have to wait long for us to move on to something that's more relevant to your work with IBIS. All right, so first up is BULLETTRAX. Let's take a look at the new features of version 3.1.1 that are specific to cartridge case image acquisition. Starting with the new toggle button to switch between camera perspective and exhibit perspective. Now this button appears below the navigation compass on the image acquisition window, and it allows us to change between perspectives in one click. Now what we mean by perspective is simply what moves when you click on a compass direction. So when you're on the camera perspective, as we are here, you see it by the binocular icon. When you click the directions on the compass, it moves the BULLETTRAX camera while the exhibit stays stationary. Now switching to the exhibit perspective, the compass movements are applied to the cartridge case exhibit while the camera stays stationary. So if you're a user that finds that the movement of BULLETTRAX is a little counterintuitive, where the cartridge case always seems to be moving away in the wrong direction for you, this toggle button will make it much easier for you to set things up the way you like to view them. We can see it here in action when the camera perspective is selected and the compass right and left arrows are clicked. This has the effect of moving the camera and not the exhibit. Then we switch over to the exhibit perspective, and now clicking on the same compass buttons has the opposite effect. So for example, the right arrow moves the exhibit to the right, the left arrow moves the exhibit to the left, and so on. Okay, so some of the biggest changes on BULLETTRAX in version 3.1.1 are to the image validation screen, and we'll take a look at them now. So firstly, the rings are now consistently represented. So for the breech face ring light image, everything between the blue outer circle and the red inner circle is what defines the breech face region of interest. And that donut-shaped area is what is correlated. On the firing pin ring light image, there's only one circle, and its color has been changed from red to blue. Inside this circle is correlated as the firing pin region of interest. Now, there was some confusion in the past that the inner circle of the breech face image was the same as the firing pin circle, which was never the case. And now that they are no longer the same color, this should help remove the confusion. There's also some more help with the identification of the correlated and uncorrelated areas in the form of a semi-transparent red overlay that appears over areas not included in the correlation. So when circles are being resized or repositioned, the overlay disappears so that the user can see the clear image without this red mask on it. And the overlay can be disabled altogether in preferences if you want. Okay, so finally for BULLETTRAX, I'd like to mention a couple of changes related to Glock cartridge cases. These are two distinct topics, so I'll mention them separately. Firstly, the Glock option for firing pin shape has changed. When we talk about Glock firing pin shapes, we're talking about the elliptical firing pin impression with a surrounding rectangular cutout shape, as seen here in images of cartridge cases fired from a Glock pistol, a Smith & Wesson Sigma, and a Springfield XDS 9mm. So the firing pin shape option for these has changed from Glock to elliptical Glock. And in future software versions, the word Glock may be dropped altogether and we'll just be selecting elliptical. Now, it's a minor change in nomenclature that you should be aware of. The second Glock topic that I want to bring up is the newer firing pin shapes that we now see on cartridge cases from some Glock pistols. These came about as a result of changes to Glock's manufacturing processes, and we now get a more circular firing pin impression with a flat edge at the 9 o'clock position. The rectangular flowback is also gone, and the shear mark now takes on more of a teardrop shape, similar to the Smith & Wesson M&P. The Glock 42 and 43 in 380 auto and 9mm parabellum calibers were the first pistols to have these new characteristics, but there is no reason to believe that more Glock models won't be produced in this new style going forward. The important thing from our point of view as IBIS users is that we enter them correctly. And this means that cartridge cases with these characteristics should be entered with a firing pin shape of circle, even when we know that they were fired from a Glock pistol. Okay, so now on to BULLETTRAX and the new features of version 3.1.1 relating to the entry of bullets. So the good news and one of the highlights of version 3.1.1 for BULLETTRAX is the big reduction in acquisition time for pristine bullets. So bullet acquisitions are now up to 50% faster. 9mm is our usual benchmark that we use, and a 9mm bullet that would previously have taken 16 to 18 minutes now takes about half that at less than 10 minutes. There are a few caveats to this performance, those being that the bullet must be correctly centered, so mounting is very important. It's also important that the light is relatively consistent around the surface, so bullets with extremely dark and light patches may take a little longer. And finally, the advanced repositioning mode must not be enabled in order to take advantage of this increased speed. It does work well, however, and it really cuts down on the time needed to enter test fires. A couple of smaller points now. First, there is a drop-down list of last used bullet calibers available in the bullet information settings for a user session. So you won't have to type in bullet diameters each time if you're using unusual calibers. And secondly, the light intensity controls have been changed, and the buttons that were there previously have been replaced by a slider. The auto light button to the left, however, still remains. Another feature that adds a little speed to the process of acquiring bullets is that the acquisition now starts automatically for pristine bullets once you set the start position and the initial topography location. We can see it here in action in this acquisition. The wraparound option is selected and the advanced repositioning mode is not enabled. So here we focus on the surface of the projectile, and then we do a quick 360-degree rotation around the bullet to ensure that our gap of 0.5 to 1 centimeter is present around the base and that we're not cutting off any information. Then we select the groove impression, or the G, that we're going to start on, and we make sure, using the confocal mode, that the camera is perpendicular to the bullet. From here, we press Next, and when asked for the initial topography location, we hit Finish. BULLETTRAX ensures that the camera is perpendicular to the bullet and also checks the mounting in a few different positions around the bullet. Now, previously, we would have needed to wait around and press the Start Acquisition button in the bottom right-hand corner, but now it just starts itself automatically. Okay, the bullet validation screen has also had a few tweaks and changes. First of these is that the initial zoom level is now more appropriate. We had a lot of comments that the image view was zoomed in too far to begin the validation, so this has been changed. The green line that indicates the start position of the acquisition now appears in the middle of the image, so we don't have to go searching for it anymore. And also the bullet circumference is now displayed in the top left-hand corner of the image view. So there's a few changes there to the validation screen that make things a little bit more convenient. A word on new Glock developments from the bullet point of view now, specifically the new Glock Marksman barrel rifling. It's also known as the Generation 5 or Gen 5 barrel, GMB, or Enhanced Polygonal Rifling. On the left-hand side here is an image of how it looks in IBIS. You've got the regular polygonal hill impression here with a deep gouge above and below. So the important thing with bullet exhibits from these barrels is that the rifling type is set as Rifled Enhanced Polygonal in IBIS, so that it's going to correlate with the correct subset of the database. Anchor lines should be placed slightly above and slightly below the deep gouges because the correlation algorithm for enhanced polygonal bullets uses the shape of the bullet as part of the search. Okay, so finally for BULLETTRAX, we'll move on to unrifled bullets. In version 3.1.1, there is for the first time a dedicated correlation algorithm for projectiles fired from unrifled barrels. There are a couple of changes to the entry and acquisition processes, so we'll go through them now. When entering the bullet exhibit into BULLETTRAX, it's obviously very important that we enter unrifled as the rifling type. Now, when we do this, the Lee count and the twist fields are grayed out, so they are always unknown. It's worth noting now that in version 3.11 or 3.11, the rifling type appears before the lead count and twist direction, whereas previously it was the other way around. So when it comes to starting the acquisition, we don't have any land and groove impressions to work with. So what we do is we try to find what we believe to be the most dominant section of striated marks. Those marks that we believe are the most likely to repeat from shot to shot. Once we've identified what we think is the most dominant section, we set the start position just above this, and then we begin the acquisition. When the acquisition is complete and BULLETTRAX presents us with the bullet image for validation, there's really not a lot of work for us to do. One signature is generated for each acquired region. So if you were able to acquire the bullet as a wraparound, there is just one region. There are no anchor lines to place or no Lees and Gs to label. We just need to verify that the image merged correctly together. It looks okay, and then we can click Save and Close. So the saved region is identified by a number without the Lee and G labeling seen on other rifling types. As you can see, the acquisition of unrifled bullets is really very straightforward. We'll talk about comparing unrifled bullets in our final section on match point, but first I'd like to do a third and final poll on the new Glock markings that we've spoken about for cartridge cases and bullets. So the question is, have you encountered any exhibits with these new types of Glock markings yet? Either the circular firing pins as seen on the Glock 42 and 43 or the Generation 5 rifling. The options will be on screen, and as always, I'll mute my microphone to give you a chance to answer. Okay, so thanks again for your answers. It looks like just over half of you have seen these new firing pin impressions. Some of you have seen both the new firing pins and the Gen 5 rifling, and a quarter of you have not seen them yet. I just hope that those of you who have seen them have been entering them according to those processes that we just went through. If you're not, I would suggest maybe going back and changing them so that they're in the database with the correct information. All right, so on to our last section of the webinar, which is the new features of version 3.1.1 for the match point. So the first new feature to introduce is the auto import status column on the correlation requests list. Now, where correlation requests are being imported from other sites, we now have visibility on the progress of the importation. So the top X results for all scores are automatically imported, and the default value of X is 20. Now it may be different for your lab, but the number in parentheses is the X value. You can see in the example here on screen, it's 20. This new column here, it allows us to see if the auto import has completed successfully or if it's had an error. It's useful for us if we don't want to start our review until we're sure all the results have been imported and we know we're not going to be delayed waiting for an exhibit to get imported from somewhere. Now, the possible outputs of this column are described here from 1 to 5. In the example in number 1 here, we can see that 6 out of 30 exhibits have been imported so far, and that the top 20 for all scores are being imported. In example 2, where a dash is displayed in the column, this means that the import has not yet begun. So that's for new requests where the correlation is still being processed. A green check mark is good news. That indicates that all exhibits have been imported without errors. If you don't receive any results from remote sites and all your results are local to your site, you'll see this check mark also. In number 4 here, you see the check mark, but you've got an amber triangle on it, which means that some exhibits were not imported successfully. And finally, in number 5 here, we see an exclamation mark, which means that there has been an error and you should call support. There's also a new column to show if the correlation request is currently being reviewed on another match point by somebody else. If somebody has the multi-viewer or side-by-side viewer open for a correlation request on another match point, this I appears in that column for the request. By hovering the cursor over the I, it shows you the username and the workstation that they're working on. Now, just because they're viewing it, it doesn't mean that you're locked out. The indicator is there just to help you avoid duplication of correlation result reviews. Okay, a new feature on the side-by-side viewer for cartridge cases is the ability to see all the available image types. So right-clicking on a thumbnail pair in the navigator view along the bottom of the viewer displays all the available image types for that region of interest. So if you want to look at the 6 o'clock sidelight image or the depth grayscale image, you can now access these more quickly in one click rather than having to change your image overlays, your compositions, your 3D rendering, and so on. It also makes it easier to compare exhibits that were acquired on HD3D with those that were not. So right-clicking on the navigator view there, it shows you what's available. In the example on screen, we can see we don't have depth grayscale, 3D, or all in focus images for the reference exhibit on the left-hand side here. There's a new feature where if you're performing a correlation review, on closing the viewer, you are now asked if you want to mark the correlation request as previously viewed. This will help avoid requests sitting at correlation done status even though they've been reviewed, and it makes the correlation request screen tidier and easier to navigate. This prompt is enabled by default for all viewers, so bullet side-by-side, bullet multi-viewer, cartridge case multi-viewer, and cartridge case side-by-side viewer will all produce this prompt. It acts as a reminder to mark those requests as viewed, and if you don't want it appearing, it can of course be disabled using your preferences under the miscellaneous section. All right, so on to unrifled bullets. We've already seen under the BULLETTRAX section how unrifled bullets are acquired as single regions, such as this one right here. What actually happens during correlation is that the regions are redressed or corrected with respect to the striated marks. After that, the region of interest is identified and all of the noise is removed. So I'll just step through that again. So here is the region. It is redressed, and then the noise is removed, leaving only the striated marks. Here's another example underneath. The redress or the correction of the angles takes place, and then the region of interest is identified. Now, every possible pair of regions is compared and a score is computed. This score is called the max region of interest, or max ROI, and it's the only score we have for unrifled bullets. Now, taking a look at a comparison using the bullet side-by-side viewer, you can see a pair of unrifled bullets here. The correlation suggests a best match position, as it does for all bullets, conventional, polygonal, and now unrifled also. We set the overlay to depth grayscale, and we also play a little bit with the contrast to clearly see the topography of the bullet surface. Now, we could try and find some areas of agreement between these bullets ourselves, or we can get some help from a new tool called CMA, which stands for Consecutive Matching Areas and is only available when comparing two unrifled bullets. The CMA tool can be run by clicking on the button at the top there along the toolbar, and it looks for areas on the bullets where there is agreement. Now, these areas are highlighted in different colors on the images. There is a legend on the right-hand side showing how many areas correspond to the colors, and we can look and see if those areas are similar enough to warrant further comparison. So you can see here in this example, a green mark or a green highlight means there's two consecutive matching areas. The deep red kind of maroon color means 7 consecutive matching areas, and so on. So that's the unrifled comparison. The last few changes here are kind of largely cosmetic, and they're more related to improving the layout of existing tools rather than introducing new features. So first up is the manual correlation request dialog box. Improvements have been made here to the site's selection dialog box, which you use when you want to correlate against a different site. So sites can now be viewed in a tree or a list view by their long name or short name, and the sites can be searched and filtered. So it's not a massive change, but something that might be useful to those of you who regularly correlate against different sites. Next up is the filtering of hits, which has moved beyond simply filtering your confirmed and unconfirmed. Right-clicking on the filters option or on the hit list on your navigation tree now gives you the option to filter your hit list by a variety of different fields that you see here. Okay, finally we have the reports tool, which has undergone a major facelift. There have been a lot of changes to the layout, making it easier to navigate and generate the reports that you're looking for. The report filter options have been renamed parameters, and there's a lot of changes, too many changes to go through here in the webinar today. But if you are somebody who uses the reports tool regularly, I would encourage you to take a look around here and familiarize yourself with it and get back to us with any questions that you have. That's pretty much it for the new features, folks. There's just time for a few of your questions, so bear with me for just a minute while I take a look at what you've been asking. Okay, so there's a lot of questions coming in there. I'll just try and go through a few of them here. Number one, the first one is, does IBIS recognize these new Glock and Smith & Wesson M&P firing pin impressions as different from other circles when correlating? No, it doesn't. A circular firing pin impression will correlate against all other circular firing pin impressions. Another question here, what if an unrifled bullet has multiple regions of interest at different places? In an example like that, where an unrifled bullet has different areas that have taken striated marks, you basically acquire it as if it was a damaged bullet in separate regions like that. Where do unrifled bullets come from? So some examples, they come from a variety of places, homemade weapons, converted weapons, gas weapons that are converted to fire real ammunition. Yeah, there's a lot of places they come from. Let me see here. Sorry guys, there is a lot of questions. I'm just trying to go through a couple of them here. Is the reports feature just available in Matchpoint? Yes, it is. It's only a feature on the Matchpoint at the moment. And does the improved speed of BULLETTRAX need any hardware upgrades? No, it's purely a software upgrade. It doesn't require any additional hardware. Once version 3.1.1 is installed, you should have that new faster bullet acquisition, provided you've mounted the bullet well and you're not using the advanced repositioning mode. Okay, so I think we'll have to hold it there. For those of you who did ask questions that I didn't get around to answering, we'll try and get back to you individually in the next day or two. Just before you go, I'd like to remind you of our e-learning platform. The new Introduction to Matchpoint module is now up and running, as well as all the webinars, the how-to videos, the user documentation, and all the other interactive training resources that are up there. All IBIS users have access to this, so if you can't find the email that you were sent with your login details, or if you haven't been sent an email with login details, get in touch with us here and we'll get you up and running. Okay, so thank you all very much for attending today and for participating in the polls and asking questions. I hope you found it interesting and that there was something in it for you to take back and to continue having success with IBIS version 3.1.1. A short 5-question survey will follow this webinar, and I'd encourage you to complete it. Also, if you can tell us some topics that maybe you'd like some help with, we could be able to plan some webinars for later in the year. As always, keep an eye on your inbox, our website, and our social media outlets for details of how to access today's recording and other training news. The e-learning platform I've just mentioned. If you can't log in, get in touch with us at the first email address here. That's training@ultraft.com. And Sabrina's email for marketing queries is right there at the end. Okay, so that's it from me. Thanks again and have a great rest of your day.